Hi, my name is Benny Johnson. As some of you know, I've been struggling with addiction. However, I decided to change my life and went into recovery. I've started this podcast 90 Days Clean, and I want to take you along in my journey. What does lie ahead of me? Let me be frank, I do not know. Will I ever drink again? I do not know. This is how Stairway to Redemption was born. It is my search for answer in a real-time process of what is going to work for me. It is then my aspiration to help you figure out what's going to work for you. It is our journey together. Welcome back to another episode of Stairway to Redemption. This week, I have the pleasure to host a good friend of mine and fellow fitness enthusiast, Caity. Caity and I met first at the AA meeting, then we ran into each other at the gym. So that's when our friendship just started because we knew we had those two things in common. Um, so yeah, I wanted Caity to tell us her story. And by the way, she is the one who put me in connection with Coach Matt, which was in the previous episode. Thank you. And shout out to Matt. Yeah, so guys, I give you Caity. How are you doing today?
Well, glad to be here. Thank you for asking me.
For sure. All right, so you know the drill. The first question is state of the mind address. So what's going on in your life lately that you can share with us?
Um, so the first thing that comes to mind is I am approaching in about 2 weeks my 9-year anniversary of being sober and clean of drugs and alcohol, which is just so crazy. Um, it's really hard to believe that I mean, it feels like at the same time, it feels like yesterday, but it also feels like a different life. Um, and usually I've said this to my friends before and I've experienced it myself that like I just get a little like weird in the head when it comes around the anniversary time and I haven't really felt the like squirreliness of it yet. So I'm sort of anticipating that, but also kind of just enjoying feeling, really kind of at peace right now.
That's awesome. Like, by the way, we're gonna get back to that quite long sobriety that you have because it's very peculiar. I mean, you very young, and I'm not gonna lie to you, the first impression when we see you in the room, like nobody can see that that woman has 9 years under her belt. Like, I don't know, like talking about not judging a book by its cover. Like, yeah, that's like the textbook example of it. And I want you to tell us your story so we can see and the audience also can understand how you build such a strong sobriety. And yeah, we're gonna expand more on that. So the floor is yours. Tell us your story.
All right. Well, considering that, let's see, I drank for about 15 years and have been sober for 9. So there's quite a few different like periods of my story because I definitely, when I tell my story, I like to incorporate all the things that I've learned within my sobriety too.
Mhm.
But for entertainment's sake, I'll give you all the good stuff of my drinking and drugging. So I am a member of a 12-step program, which is where I met Benny.
Mhm.
And that has been, the number one thing that has kept me sober. So starting at the beginning, I was born in Connecticut to two great parents. My dad was a sober alcoholic. He got sober when he was 15. Um, and met my mom, who just never really drank, but she had an alcoholic father. So she's got her own kind of like addictive tendencies. But, one of the reasons she fell in love with my dad was because he was sober and he worked a really solid program. And so I came along and I was the little baby running around the AA rooms out at my dad's anniversaries and things like that. And I had this really kind of like idyllic childhood for like the younger part of my life. I grew up on like a dead end street with a bunch of kids, and we played until the street lights came on, and, you know, never really got into any trouble because we were just like a really close knit neighborhood. Everybody looked out for one another, kind of like takes a village mentality. Um, and it was fantastic. I remember being in the DARE program, um, and, learning about how drugs are bad, and, always thinking in my head, like, I would never do drugs. But at the same time, like I think as soon as I could have a kind of like awareness of myself, I was immediately insecure and felt like, everybody else had something that I didn't, regardless of what it was, whether it was like, they were more outgoing or more popular, or, they were able to stay out later than me, or their parents got along better than my parents got along with the other guys in the neighborhood. So there was always this kind of like disconnection for as far back as I can remember. And just to speed up through my childhood stuff, um, I did find Alateen, which, for those of you who don't know, it's basically like a 12-step program for the children of alcoholics. And there, it is a 12-step program. You're supposed to have a sponsor and work steps, but I really just kind of went as a social thing. But I remember down the line thinking like, seeing all those kids from Alateen like at a party, and we were just like kind of this like unspoken thing of like, aren't we like not supposed to be drinking because our parents are alcoholics and we'll probably end that way. But anyway, so I picked up my first drink probably somewhere around like 12 or 13. My parents had split up at this time. My dad moved out and my mom kept alcohol in the house. Just, I don't even know why. She never ever drank. It was just kind of like collecting dust on a wine rack. And she had this like absolute Tanqueray, or absolute tangerine. And so I remember like, I don't know, one day kind of like having the balls to sip it. And it tasted kind of good, but like I wasn't drinking enough to feel any of the effect. Um, but my first like real drunk that I can recall was when I had gotten into high school. I was a freshman. Again, still feeling that like really out of place, awkward. Puberty had started to hit, and I was always kind of like I was always commented on for like looking nice and being pretty. And but I was just so shy and insecure. And so winding up at like a party or something and drinking for the first time to the point of getting drunk. I think I was drinking Goldschlager, which is like cinnamon liqueur. And I knew about it because my friend's dad drank it. And I got drunk, and it was like the best night of my life. I was super social. Like the next, Monday rolled around at school, and I like everybody was like, like everybody knew my name, and I was funny and pretty, and I could talk to boys, like, that whole thing that you hear. And from from that very moment, I knew I wanted it as much as possible, as often as possible. And that's what I did. I mean, uh, like I said, I grew up in Stratford, Connecticut, which borders Bridgeport, Connecticut, which doesn't have the best reputation for, valid reasons. And so it was really easy for us, even at 15 years old. I mean, I look young now. When I was 15, I probably looked like I was an 8-year-old. And it was no problem to just walk into the package store and ask for, they weren't selling us liquor, but they'd sell us 40s. And so, like I said, it was just like a mission to get drunk as as drunk as possible, as often as possible. And I shared at a meeting recently that, you know, prior to coming in around or to starting to drink around seventh and eighth grade, I had belonged to this church, and I was all about like no drinking, no drugging, no sex before marriage. I burned all my CDs, like any music that I had that wasn't like specifically talking or singing about God. No swearing, I was like a real goody two shoes. And there was, a specific instance in my freshman year of college where I remember leaving my youth group early and walking to a party. And it was like at that very moment, like I had abandoned my God, my higher power, and went and made alcohol my higher power.
Mm-hmm.
And can't remember exactly why I brought that up, but it did, coincide so well with the you know, alcohol becoming my master. And at first it was wonderful. It was the love of my life very quickly. Um, I was once a pretty like popular kid. Throughout high school, I became the captain of my cheerleading team by the time I was a senior. I had always gotten straight A's. But really, by the time my senior year rolled around, um, alcohol was absolutely the number one thing. At first it was just drinking on the weekends, but by the time I was a senior in high school, I had like two drinking buddies that drank the way that I did, and everybody else just was kind of like, they were worried about me. But to me, it came off like they were just trying to, they were like these small minded people who just didn't want to let me have fun, and they were jealous and da da da. But they were genuinely concerned because I was showing up to school drunk and I was getting in trouble all the time. And I had my license by then, and every day after school, me and my two friends, we would go and we would pool our lunch money together and bring it to, the guy we knew who had graduated a year before and had a fake ID, and he could get us liquor, and we would just drive around, like 17 years old, just drive around town drinking while driving and getting pretty drunk. Um, but it was a pretty small town, and we never had any issues with the cops. And, by that point, it started to like already like not be so much fun. Mm. I had become pretty much a daily drinker by then. And that was the start of me blaming everything on the outside for the way I felt inside. As great and fun and exciting as the alcohol had initially made me feel, it really started to take its toll and isolate me and start to be something that came first before everything else. And so from then on out, I graduated high school and I moved to New York right away because I blamed Stratford for, me feeling like such an outcast. And, I did 4 years of college, and for the majority of college, it was kind of like accepted to drink the way that I did. But I actually, like 2 nights ago, I found four of my old journals, and I have avoided reading them my entire sobriety because I don't think I was ever prepared for what I was going to read. And the insanity is real. A lot of it was me talking about how much fun I had, but there was never one moment of me writing without talking about, how much I had to drink or drug. Um, so, again, the same experience with college. I tried to like escape the town and start anew. And a lot of these journal entries were written while I was in college. And I was withdrawing from classes. My GPA just went right down the tube. Um, any kind of like athletic stuff that I had been involved in before also went right out the door. There was bars that I could get into now. And, um, like it's one thing always sticks out in my mind is that I remember this older girl when I was in high school saying that like I was one of the people that wasn't going to peak in high school. And she always said like, Caity's going to go on to like actually do something with her life. She's not going to stick around this town and, become like a junkie like the rest of us. Cause my town is definitely known for that. A lot of people died or wound up in prison, um, or like severely disfigured from car accidents and things like that. I have quite a few friends who've dealt with that. But in any case, um, that wore on me all the time because I remember thinking like when I get to this point, I'll get my shit together. When I get to this point, I'll get my shit together. And by the time I was supposed to graduate college, I had withdrawn from too many classes, so I had to do another year. And I was always kind of scheming and manipulating my parents, and I had started getting into a lot of car accidents. I think it was my fifth year of college. I wasn't getting my master's. I was just trying to get my bachelor's degree, but I overdosed intentionally. Um, and that's when things really started kind of getting quite dark for me. Um, I could not function without alcohol. And I had started doing, I kind of like smoked weed the whole time. I never really loved it, but in reading those journals, I didn't quite realize how much weed I smoked. I was always drunk and like 75% of the time high on weed as well. And then Coke came into the picture. And at first it was just it, I mean, it was definitely something that I prided myself on not doing because I had always kind of wound up surrounding myself with people who I felt were worse off than me, like, the real kind of drug addicts. And I just like to drink. And then, I remember one night being at this Halloween party, and I was known for a long time as being the girl who was like, I had drank so much all day. By the time I would get to a party, I'd like drink for maybe an hour and then be the one that passed out in the middle of a party. And this kid who was conveniently dressed up like a drug dealer at this Halloween party just so happened to actually be a drug dealer. And him and I sat in the bathroom for the entire night just doing coke. And I was like, it was like another I had arrived moment. At first alcohol was like, this is what I've been waiting for. And then coke came along and I was like, no, this is what I've been waiting for. And at that point, I think, when I think about my drinking in kind of like three different stages, there was like the fun time. And then now in this middle point, it's like I'm starting to catch on that it's really affecting my life, but I am in so much denial. Like there is not a shot in hell that I'm going to quit. Like I said, I started uh, drinking. I mean, I started drinking and driving and getting into car accidents. I started something just fell.
Yeah, so I heard
I
that.
started
Hmm.
I started uh having some health effects from it. I was sick all the time, all the time. And I was like, I think it was either Bridget or Alex that said the other night, like, I was a puker. Oh, I was a freaking puker. I puked everywhere. I spent a lot of time in New York City, and I like to say I puked on every block in that city. Um, in the subway stations, on myself, in the in the trash cans. Although I remember like the trash cans in the subway station were like too high for me to get my body over to puke into, so I would wind up just going into a corner and just like puking on the ground. And I was telling a friend last night actually, like I would drive back and forth to Rhode Island a lot. I had a bunch of friends up there who, if I could, again, like another geographic, I was always trying to escape the outside things. So after I blamed Connecticut, I moved to New York. I blamed New York. So I was up in Rhode Island all the time. And I was, constantly hungover driving back and forth if I wasn't actually drunk. And doing like 80 miles an hour on 95, just puking out the window, like gross stuff. But That's where my alcoholism took me. And then when the Coke came in, that which is kind of like my last portion of drinking is where things got really, really dark. So I had graduated college, I had moved into the city, and it's just like every time I think of that time, I just think of it like not only as being like spiritually void, mentally dark, emotionally dark, but just like physically dark as well. Like I slept all day. Um Actually, I didn't sleep much at all in those days. So I would like work all day, come home from work and like, have my blackout shades. I would sleep for maybe like an hour or two and then get up and go into the city and just like party all night long. Um, but it wasn't long before everything got very, very isolated. I was actually working overnights for a long time. So that's when I was really like, I remember like I would get off work at 7 o'clock. And by the time I got on the train home to my apartment in Queens, the liquor store right next to the train station and my house was open at 8. And so I would go in there and I would get a bottle and I would drink until I passed out. And then I would, sleep the day away and then wake up and go to work. And I remember like for a long time, I started hitting up my Coke guy like before work. And like, it's so pathetic because like he knew I had actually worked for like a friend of his at my
Mm-hmm.
current job. And so whenever I was going to buy Coke from him, which would be like conveniently right before I was going to work, I would always say, like, oh, I'm getting it for somebody else. I'm getting it for somebody else because I didn't want him to know that like I was gonna go and like do a bunch of drugs while I was at work all night. But I wasn't kidding anybody. And I always try to kind of like keep my drug addiction and alcoholism very kind of like hush hush. Like, I could party with the best of them, but I didn't really want anybody to see like all the drinking and drugging that I was doing by myself. I loved it. I loved drinking and drugging by myself. I would get like really intense and I'm a super emotional person. So drugs and alcohol definitely brought that out in me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like by the end of it, I had my kind of like last year of using, I had quit my job in the city. My mother is from England, so I have dual citizenship. So I bought a one-way ticket with my British passport to England, thinking, again, I could do another geographic, just start over somewhere fresh. And that was really, thankfully the bottom, the beginning of the bottom for me. I was in this foreign country. I didn't know anyone. I drank and drugged alone. It wasn't hard for me to weed out dealers pretty much immediately. I used dating apps to find drugs. And while I was out there in the winter of 2013, my dad, who had actually gone back out and begun drinking again, at this point, it had probably been like, I don't know, like 15 to 20 years that he had been out, and it was really, really, really starting to catch up on him. And he had 2 strokes. And that terrified me, especially me being, in another country and not being able to be there for him. And then in February, the day after my birthday of 2013, I got a text that my like one of my best friends in the world had died directly from this disease. I mean, when I first got that text, nobody said what it was, but like 27-year-old from Stratford dies. It's drugs. Um, and I just lost it. It was like if I hadn't been drinking as much as I possibly could already, I was doing like extra credit overtime to just completely, completely numb myself out. And I was an absolute wreck. It's probably 40 pounds overweight. I had an oversized liver. had I came back to the States. I had no job, couldn't get a job. Um, was living at my high school boyfriend's kind of like bachelor pad. Um, and that was from, I guess, March of 2013 into that summer. And things just never got any better. They just kept getting worse and worse and worse. I was just like an absolute shell of a person. And, I had been in the car accidents and I'd gotten arrested and I had overdosed and I had the, health issues and literally like puking blood and not being, being able to like, I don't know how else to say it, but I pissed myself like on a regular basis because I just had like no control over that. And the puking and the waking up. Like I remember one time, like around that time just before I got sober, like waking up and just having like a huge bruise from, like the tip of my chin down to my chest. And I
Mhm.
had, I'd fallen and had no recollection of it. Um, and I don't know, like today I choose to believe that it was like a divine intervention because I had isolated myself enough from everybody that, nobody with the exception of maybe my boyfriend knew about how bad it really was. And I hid a lot of my drinking from him too. He went to work every day and I just stayed home and drank. And so one morning I kind of like came to out of a blackout and I had known that this girl that I used to drink and party with a lot in college, she had gotten sober. So I remember I was on my BlackBerry and I couldn't pay my phone bill. So like I could only use it when I had Wi-Fi. And so I was up, at my boyfriend's house and I texted her at like, maybe like 6 or 7 in the morning. And I couldn't even remember like how I left things off with her. Something inside of me like was telling me that like we left off on bad terms. Probably because we were both like complete drunken idiots. But regardless, I reached out and I was just like, can you tell me how you got sober? Because it was the last, I had tried so many different things to try and just like feel better about my life. I never ever wanted to admit that it was the drinking and drugs that were the problem. I really convinced myself that it wasn't. Maybe if I was skinnier, or maybe if I had a better job, or maybe, if I had more money, like just, a million different things. If I lived somewhere else, if I had a different boyfriend, if I had better friends, but I never wanted to admit that it would require really looking at myself. And but it was the one thing that I just like couldn't do. And so I asked her and she said that she went to meetings. And so it was a couple days later, that was probably in June of 2014. And she took me to a couple meetings up in Connecticut. That's where my boyfriend and I were living. And it took me a while to really kind of like, I was very, very, at that point, I was like, I had gone from the point of believing that like, if there is a God, it's abandoned me, to there is absolutely nothing. It's just me against the world. And, living in this just completely, I don't know, destitute existence. Um, so, spirituality is a huge part of AA. And it took me a really long time to grasp that. So in the beginning, hearing about it was definitely like quite a turnoff. Um, but people just told me to keep coming, keep coming. I drank up until September 7th of 2014, where I wound up moving back to New York and with my parents, my dad and his wife, and joining a home group there. Like I had said, my dad was sober for most of my childhood. And so, despite the fact that he was still viciously drinking to the point of him being regularly hospitalized and having these mini strokes on like a weekly basis, and my stepmom having, her own demons, um, my dad was able to put me in touch with somebody in New York who he had known from his days of sobriety who invited me to a home group. I got a sponsor, I think, that night, and I pretty much started working the steps immediately. Um, and it did, I lied, I think, for the first 90 days that I supposedly had up right, like up until I was about to celebrate my 90 days and the guilt was like eating me. And I told my sponsor, like, I've been lying. I've been drinking. And her response, I think, was really what kind of like opened my eyes to a lot of things, because I expected her, just like everybody else in my life, to be like, of course you did. You're a fucking failure. And she didn't say that at all. She said, it happens. Day one tomorrow. Started recounting my days and have been able to stay sober ever since, which is, an absolute miracle. People tell me all the time, especially like you had mentioned, like I am pretty young to have 9 years. However, I know that I look even younger than I am. So when people are like, you have 9 years of sobriety, oh my God, that's amazing. And then, I have friends that maybe not friends, but like people that I grew up with that I've gotten in touch with over the years that are like, oh my God, you stopped drinking. That's incredible, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I don't feel like I did any of it. I just somehow managed to have the balls from the girl who could not step out of her freaking house without having a drink or a drug in her to be able to walk into a room of strangers and say, like, I'm Caity, I'm an alcoholic. It's just like, that's not me. I am full of self-centered fear and anxiety, and I'm selfish, and but somehow, like, through putting down the drink and the drug and having a program of recovery in my life, I've been able to continue to show up and be reminded of like how much, not only did it save my life, but it just gave me so many more gifts. So I feel like I've been talking for so long and I just got to like
No,
like
I
getting
just
sober part of the
no,
story.
I just know the story was so significant, and like I didn't want to stop you because it was. I think, like, there are sometimes you just need to let people talk. Like I remember you were concerned when I asked you if you wanted to be on the podcast. Like, I don't even know what I'm gonna talk about. But look at you now. Like, like you just went on.
Myself all day.
Yeah. And so that's man, I was captivated by the story. It's just like, there's the part where you reach out to that friend who took you to your first A meeting. And do you remember the feeling you had that day? Was there like you woke up and you were like, yeah, I'm tired of this shit? Or was that like a divine intervention? Like, because, most people have different kind of bottom. Like some need to be institutionalized, someone like need to lose or like almost die. But you went through, even an overdose didn't tell you to stop, but it was just the way I understood it. It was just one day you had enough. Like, do you remember the feeling you had that day? Like, do you
Sponsor,
remember?
I remember,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, my first sponsor had actually asked me about my bottom when we were kind of like talking about my story when we first met. I remember her telling me, like, you are blessed to have had an emotional bottom versus, coming in here like court mandated or after a car accident or something. Because
Yeah.
I actually was in, and
Sorry, you said you were in
that
what?
didn't stop me.
It stuck. It stopped before. Sorry, it cut for a little bit. You said you were in.
I was in an outpatient program
Okay.
um that and like when I in my early 20s, and that did not stop me. So my first sponsor said, it's really great that you've had this emotional bottom versus maybe like a physical one, because you've already like had a lot of those physical bottoms, and you knew that didn't necessarily stop you. And so like this is like a real conviction in your heart, I guess, that like you've tried everything and nothing is stopping. So it's just this kind of like I have nothing left.
Mhm.
Um and so when I reached out to that friend, it was probably like a day or two before she actually took me to my first meeting. So there's always, I know a lot of other alcoholics and addicts can relate. Well, where there's that like moment of surrender. And then like if you have to wait like a second longer, let alone like a day or two before you actually like go and do something about it, the like battle between your head is like, oh my God, was I overreacting? Like maybe I'm like, I sobered up. I'm not as hungover, like I'm fine. And so there was definitely like those moments of hesitation, but there was also just this like feeling of relief. Somebody spoke about it in a meeting this morning, like after an intervention that he had, where, it's just like, I don't know, there's a chance that my life could be immeasurably better. And like, I just, they say in the AA literature, like we cease fighting. um it was like I had resigned from waved my white flag and surrendered, and I didn't have to like go on with the lying and the hiding and the stealing and the cheating and all the crappy things. I was like, maybe I actually can become that girl who didn't peak in high school, maybe I can actually do something good with my life. And so I went to that first meeting, and it was in New Haven, Connecticut. There's a lot of colleges there. So it was a ton of young people. And I was so overwhelmed. I was so freaking overwhelmed. And I was just like, part of me was like, I'm this kind of like, I hate everybody person. I'm surrounded by all these young kids who are like laughing and having the time of their life, and they're sober. And I'm like, fuck these people, like, are
Yeah,
you for real? Like, these people are on something else. I don't know if I want any part in it. But then
yeah.
another big part of me, I remember at my very first meeting, this 20-year-old kid, he had never had a legal drink. He was celebrating or something, but he was sharing his story for like the full hour. And he talked about like being able to laugh as a sober person for the first time. And like they also read the promises, the AA promises at the beginning of the meeting, which talks about, being like free of financial insecurity and, being able to handle situations that used to baffle us. And I, I just like wanted those things. And I wanted to know what it was like to like just be sober and to be able to like have a life without being consumed by the drugs and alcohol. And so that like little bit of identification is what carried me to the next meeting. And like it definitely wasn't a like I didn't walk in there and be like, I'm home, my people. I was
Yeah,
very guarded, but at the same time, like I had been blessed with this kind of this hope. I can't describe it as anything else that really just said, just give it a try.
that's amazing. Like, I'm really happy for you that, like, yeah, I think that you use the proper term for that, like emotional bottom versus physical one. And this leads me to my next question. So again, congratulations on, that long, amazing sobriety. I can tell, that like you appear to be very secure and strong when it comes. And one of the reason at first I thought you had let's say like a younger sobriety than you have is I remember one time you shared about like, things that were going through for you going through your life, and you mentioned like a breakup, and I was like, in my mind I was like, oh, if you want to break up, like 95% of like that percentage is like made up. I don't know, like, but whatever, the high percentage of people going to a breakup leads to a relapse. So I was like, yeah, maybe, because me personally, I shared that on the podcast several times. I don't like asking people time is not the first question that I ask. Like, I like to know them better. It comes naturally later. The more I know, the more, they're gonna themselves tell me how much time they have. So in my mind, I was like just guessing, like maybe a younger sobriety, maybe a year or two, or like, and yeah, like especially now that you talk about how insecure you felt when, you always thought that somebody had always something over you, whether they're prettier, whether they're like, their relationship with the neighbors were better than your parents. Like, how do you navigate relationships? Not only like, intimate relationship like boyfriend, but like friendships as well, and not let that affect your sobriety, like especially for somebody who felt insecure at time.
Um, yeah, I mean, I still really struggle with insecurity, but it's definitely immeasurably better than it was when I was using, because I just, I felt so alone and lost in life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, AA has given me, especially over the past couple of years, this like unbelievable connection with a higher power. And that's something that I really, it helps me with everything, but like for me, navigating relationships has always been something that's super challenging for me because of my insecurities and me wanting to always fix everything and fix everyone, whether it's a romantic relationship or otherwise. Situations with my parents. And the only thing that has ever brought me any comfort and ability to kind of like move through it with grace is trusting that things happen the way that they are and I can only control my side of it. And like, the fact that you brought up that you thought because I was talking about a breakup that like maybe my sobriety was younger, I think is like something that I consider very important in my recovery is sharing super honestly, especially because I have, you know, I only have one day at a time. I only have
Yeah.
today, but
Mm-hmm.
those days together have amounted up to be almost a decade. And when I think about like, well, how did I, get through the loss and, having to deal with my dad's relapse as a sober person and going through breakups and, seeing friends that I've made in this program die, like, and, friendships that I've grown out of, all those things. Like, it's so important for me to hear other people with time sharing honestly about what's going in their life and how like just because you get sober for a couple years doesn't mean that life stops sucking. um like I choose to find gratitude when I can, but at the end of the day, like I'm a self-centered alcoholic and I always want everything to be about me. um but I always want to like, my instinct is to put on this like facade of like, yeah, everything's great, everything's fine. And I do believe that like no matter what happens in my life, as long as I stay sober, everything will always be okay. But that doesn't mean that like really uncomfortable situations aren't going to happen. And so
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I need to hear other people with time sharing about their struggle and their ability to stay sober through it
Mm-hmm.
makes it super important for me to be like, yeah, I just had an absolutely devastating breakup. I'm beside myself. I'm cursing at my higher power. I don't understand why I have to go through this again,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not going to fucking drink over it. And so, it's being honest with myself and being honest with the higher power and allowing myself to believe that, like, I have control over what I do, but everything else is in God's hands.
Yeah, I got that. That's a very stoic way of thinking. If I love stoicism. I'm not gonna explain it because I can like, but like you said, like you love listening to people who have time to to get an idea of how they went through this. But I want your take on this. I noticed unfortunately in like some 12-step programs that like people who are times sometimes when they share, me personally, I take issues with some of their shares that are not authentic, like that I feel are not authentic. Let me correct that. That it's always like, oh, I go to 8 meetings a week for X because I still have triggers. I'm under the impression that those people are, in the book they talk about like a man can go, a man in recovery can go at the end, like the goal is to be you can go to any place that any other man can go as long as you're spiritually fit, right? And some of those old timers, I doubt that they are spiritually fit. Like, if you cannot go on a cruise or you cannot watch Scarface or you cannot go to a Grateful Dead concert because like you feel that after 48 years you're gonna be triggered and there's an issue. Now, when you have people with all those years who like, going to like a breakup or a divorce who share that like they're struggling because now those are not like there are how to say there are like problems that are not tied to alcohol that affect them and that they used to use alcohol to numb themselves and they're trying to get stronger. Do you understand the difference that make between those kind of two shares, right? Like there are
So,
those who I feel like are not spiritually fit and have time versus those who are spiritually fit, have time, but go to the trenches of life. Do you make the distinction between those two people with time?
I mean, to be honest, like really try not to judge anybody's way of doing things, but like
Yeah.
I'm a human person and I definitely feel like quality over quantity when it comes to sobriety. There are people who haven't drank in 30 years, but they still act like an asshole.
Yeah.
But it's none of my business. I just stay away from those people. But like, and there is like in AA specifically, there's, kind of like a guideline of like the way that we like suggest how to be this kind of like not just a abstinent person, but to live like a useful, enjoyable life. And I know what works for me. And when I sponsor women, I tell them what's worked for me. And if they don't want to do it that way, that's that's fine with me. It's just I can only share my specific experience. I do remember like early on in my sobriety, it was right before Thanksgiving, and an old timer was sharing at a meeting, and he pretty much just like spent 10 minutes listing off the things you shouldn't eat on Thanksgiving because they might have been cooked with alcohol. And like,
Come on, man. Okay, go ahead.
listen, like there's certain things that people can't do. If that guy is worried that like he can't have something that was cooked with alcohol, then like he doesn't have to eat it. Um, but there's definitely been triggering things for me. I definitely feel quite secure in my never wanting to drink again. I go to bars to see
Mhm.
live music, and I do a lot of the things that I did drunk sober now, and it's wonderful. But there have been moments for sure, like certain movies where they're like really having a grand old time, like doing a bunch of ecstasy and stuff. Like I can't watch it because it just makes
Mhm.
me want to do it. And like I just like don't need that kind of like romanticizing in my
Yeah.
life anymore. I go out with friends that drink, and like when it gets to a certain point and they're all wasted, I tend to go home because it's just not fun anymore. Like
Yeah.
I said, like my goal is to
Mhm.
be, a useful person who has a relatively enjoyable life. And so I'm just going to stick to the things that like allow me to do that. I can't be useful if I'm drinking. And I can't really be useful if I'm like somewhere or with someone or doing something that's just making my head go like, oh, I wish I was fucked up right now. So I
Yeah.
think, it's definitely a personal way of doing sobriety. Like the girls last week talked about like one of them smokes weed, and like my initial reaction is like, how can you say you're sober if you smoke weed? But at the same time, like, who gives a shit? Like she's
Yeah.
been able to like have this life that um really works for her, and she's doing it. She considers herself sober, and that is, it doesn't matter what I think. I know what works for me, and I'm
Mhm.
happy that other people can find what works for them.
That's great. Like I like how you tolerant you are and open-minded, Unfortunately, in these endeavors of ours of staying sober, even, some in the book, everybody, says that I work, whatever works for me. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't. But unfortunately, you can tell those who really want to force their ways on others. And that's sometimes I take issues with some people, in the rooms. And that's what making sure that I pick the right people in my sobriety network. I just don't want everybody to agree with me, but it's important to pick the right people in your sobriety network that will help you get sober. It's not just pick all the friends that are gonna agree with you. No, that's different. What's your process like for like, you have your sponsor obviously, but you how do you pick the people in your team?
That's a good question. I think like especially when I first came in, like the women that I wound up surrounding myself were just like my sponsors, other sponsees. And I got close to them through that. And then I had changed home groups when I moved, and I was like really intent on like making sober friends so that I could have some sort of social life, people that I actually like can relate to on other levels than just the fact that we're sober.
Yes.
And I went to this great young people's meeting in Westchester for a long time. It was my home group until I moved out to Long Island. And, we did a lot of really, really amazing things. But then what I kind of realized was that, like, a lot of it was me kind of like using that, like, fear of missing out to hang out with people who I didn't necessarily even have that good of a time with.
Yeah.
And so now where I'm at, especially because I'm in like this new place, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of new people, and I am in that phase of like trying to figure out like who do I want in my network. And I just, again, I always kind of feel like I'm going to draw it back to like my higher power, is that like I just kind of let it happen organic. Like bumping into you at the gym and realizing that we had, that in common. Like fitness is super important in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really nice to have another sober person who I can talk about fitness with. And I
Yeah.
think, different people play different roles. Um, my sponsor is kind of like, she's out here, but I know her from back home. And she's kind of been almost like a sister to me, like obviously I go to her with all my stuff because she's my sponsor, but our relationship is a little bit closer than that. And, there's people, it's just like I had just mentioned, like kind of like different people serve different purposes in my life. And I think that's just how it goes, like for friendships in general, but it's important for me to have like a group of sober people, like, a group of people I could call on
Yeah.
when shit really hits the fan. or the people that I'm going to celebrate with when things go really great as a result of my sobriety.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of those women are people from home
Yeah.
or from back in Westchester.
That's good. Yeah, let's yeah, you hit it on the there. Like what also really attracted me to talk and know more about you was the fact that I knew we had fitness in common, that I could also talk to you after the meetings about like, hey, like, are you gonna come to the gym, like what are you gonna work on, like, like we could talk because we already knew we had recovery in common, right? That's where we initially met. And then now that we have something, we can talk about something else. Me personally, like the issue I have with sometime the fellowship is I'm not I don't have much in common. Uh, I don't feel like I have much in common with the others, a lot in them, and also I didn't have a great time whenever I was socializing with them, go to the diner or something, because it was like, okay, guys, we all recovery addicts, right? What else do we have in common? Let's talk about something else, like even sports, like that's basic, but it was always, sadly, in my experience, about, oh, how many days you have? What step are you in? Do you follow this program? Oh, did you hear that person fell? What happened to that person? And then I was like, okay, we human beings, there's always going to be gossip. But my issue with me being sober reminds me how much I don't like people. I love individuals. I don't like people. When you are among people, you have mass effect. And the mass effect, I cannot stand the mass effect of people in recovery. And that hurts me. And like, sorry, listeners, I'm venting right now. That's that annoys the shit out of me. And with having things in common like fitness, like you, I feel like I can know you at the individual level, and you'll be surprised. There are a lot of more people in that gym that we go to who are also in the rooms that I'm getting closer to, because like, oh, we're just seeing each other every day at the gym. Then you go to a meet, you see the guy, you're like, okay, we have things common. Then we talk. We're like at the gym, we're like, oh, am I gonna see you later today at 5? Yeah, and now I can know somebody at the individual level, but I could not do that with, whenever like the diners or whatever activities they had after, because it was hard. It was not that people were, I don't think people were stupid or simple-minded. It's just like people are caught in that mass effect in recovery, where like all they think they have to talk to about is about how sober they are. But you being now also a fitness buff, even like a better runner than I am, how do you share that passion? Do you talk about it to your sponsor or to your sponsors? Are you trying to like expose how uh how public are you with that side of you, like the fitness part?
I actually, I kind of treat it the same way I think I treat my recovery. Only like I'm a little bit more open about my like fitness stuff to the general public. Like I post stuff online or on
Mhm.
Instagram all the time. Um, but I'm not out here like giving unsolicited advice or like telling someone about, like how much I love to work out unless they really ask.
Mhm.
Um, so with my sponsor, 100%, like I said, when I moved out here, she had just moved here too, and she was somebody that I had knew from back home. But something that like I really loved about her is that she's a fitness instructor, and
Mhm.
so it's like I know that she will understand how important it is to me. But with my sponsees, like unless they ask me, I really don't talk about it because I didn't find fitness and like a regular workout routine to be something that I could have incorporated into my early sobriety. Um, I really wanted to, but there was just so much inside stuff that I had to work on before I could really dedicate
I see.
the time to do it the way I usually do now. I feel like I've been on a little bit of a I don't know, what do they call, like a hiatus for the last 2 weeks because my coach went to Bali. And so I
Yeah,
had
shout out to
spent the
Matt, by
past
the
2 weeks, I was
way.
like
Like,
healing really
yeah.
poor.
Yeah, shout out to Matt who was in the previous
So that went
episode.
away
Yeah.
and I had like a decent excuse not to work out because I had a infection in my arm. So I was just like, well, I'm just not going to do anything. But he's back. And so
Oh no, yeah. Now he named I just saw the post on Instagram. He named a workout after you just to get that was too funny.
So I'm like, oh shit. And the name of it was Caity. Oh, Caity. In my head, that's him saying, like, oh, Caity, you haven't worked out for the last 2 weeks, so I'm gonna kick your ass.
I can totally see him do that. Oh man, that's too funny. Oh yeah, I asked you how public you are with your fitness, but now how public are you with your recovery? When you talk to somebody or make new connection, um, how many hangouts or how long does it take for you to disclose that if you do disclose?
So it's like, I don't know, I feel like at this point in my life, like I'm not really out here like meeting people a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where I would have to have that discussion. But like in the past, it's always been like I will tell people completely upfront, like I don't drink. It comes up a lot, like if I'm out at like work, social events, anytime I'm offered a drink somewhere, I just say, oh no, either no, thank you, or if they press like, oh, I actually don't drink. And really the only time I like am open about me going to AA meetings, just because this is how I was taught, is like,
Mm-hmm.
um, unless somebody is reaching out for help and asking me how I got sober, that's when I'll tell them. So I've been working as a makeup artist with this company since I got sober, since 2014. Actually, maybe it was 2015, but in any case, like it, it took a while for them to even realize that I didn't drink. It was maybe at like our Christmas party. But even then it was just like, oh, I'm not drinking. They're normal. So they're not like, why aren't you drinking? No, you got to drink. That's how I was. If somebody told me they didn't drink, I was going to make it my mission. But in any case, it's only been over the past 2 years that I've made it like a little bit more obvious that I am like an alcoholic in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was really like, it was maybe like last month that this one girl that I've been working with the entire time, she knew, even though I never told her. She had picked up on it after like a mutual friend of ours. And, she's completely accepting of it or whatever. But like especially for people who don't have a problem, like there, I just feel like there is still a stigma, and it's not like I hide it. If somebody asks, I'll tell them. But I also like, I wouldn't ever want someone who's considering sobriety to look at me and, God forbid I relapse or something. And they'll be like, well, Caity was in AA and it obviously didn't work for her. Because I think maybe like a part of me felt that way with my dad. Like after seeing him relapse, like,
Mm-hmm.
well, AA didn't work for him, you know? Um, but, I know for me, it's a very personal journey and I have a great foundation. And so I've been able to really like live this program in its entirety for the most part. Um, but I wouldn't ever want to do anything that would jeopardize anybody else's chance of recovery. So to answer your question, I'll either say, no, thank you, or I don't drink, or, in romantic relationships, I typically say it off the bat, like I don't drink. I used to drink, but I don't drink anymore. And I don't plan on drinking. I'm not the type of girl it's going to have like one drink. And then, if it was going to go on to something more serious, I would, of course, say, because AA, I go to AA meetings almost every morning.
Mhm.
People, like significant people in my life will be like, well, where are you going every meeting?
Yeah, that's good. Before I give you the floor, you point out something like with your dad that just popped a question in my mind. Is it I are you concerned that people see the normal people, people see those who are in recovery as ticking time bombs, that it's just a matter of time before they relapse, no matter how long they have? Was that your concern?
Um, I don't think I ever actually really like put that much like conscious thought into it. I know that there are people out there that have all sorts of different opinions. Usually the people that would have the opinion like you said, I would assume would be people that have a close person in their life that tried to get sober and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Um, for me with my dad, my own experience, like he after my 90 days, he decided to try and get sober. And he just celebrated a year about 2 months ago. It was around Father's Day, which is amazing. But, I did see him out there for a long time, and I saw him in the hospital bed over and over and over again as a direct result of his drinking. And I saw him come into the program and lie. And so it is definitely very difficult for me to trust that he will never drink again
Okay.
because, knock on wood and God willing, I've been sober for 9 years and I'll be sober for the rest of my life. But like, he was sober for 18 years and he went out, like a drink is only an arm's length away and anything could happen. And, I don't let that concept get too far away from me. Um, Alcoholism and addiction are so insidious, doesn't matter who you are. Um, so I don't know if that answered your question. I
No,
don't
it
even really
does. It
remember what
does.
it was.
Like, no, I mean, the way I got it from it is like, based on your experience with your dad, like, you're not sure if you will ever, like, not drink ever again, but at the same time, you're not seeing everybody as like the term, like, ticking time bomb I use. Like, it depends on people. Like you said, a drink is only a length away and you cannot read the future, but like God, will and your higher power, you will prevail. I like that answer. All right. So we reach the conclusion of our interview, and the floor is yours. If there's something you want to share about, or you want people to reach out to you or anything, yeah, go ahead. Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Just to touch on what you just said, something that I've learned pretty recently in sobriety is that like it's the concept that I think a lot of people are aware of that like we only have today. And so, especially with my dad, I have just decided to like love and accept that he is working a program and that he's sober right now. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Um, but, I think you can, especially as an addict myself, like I can pick up when somebody's like starting to go downhill a little bit. And so I just try to kind of like steer clear of those people. And when it's somebody that's close in my life that I really, really care about, like the whole detaching with love and having boundaries for my own sobriety is something that's really important. Um, I'm so grateful to you for asking me to do this. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I'm a little bummed that like I don't see you at the gym anymore because I switched gyms.
Yeah.
Um, and now I don't know anybody at the gym. Um, also so grateful for Matt, who's come into my life. You know, he was just like this girl that I know posted something about, you know, do you want to lose weight? Contact Coach Tiz. And he's been an absolute blessing in my life. The fact that he's sober and the fact that he's, you know, so into the health and the spirituality. And that's something that I you know, like about you is that, you know, just getting that like indirect contact with the Moon Goddess studio in
Yep.
Huntington, like
Mm-hmm.
it was an amazing experience. And so I find that like for me, health and spirituality and recovery all like really tie into each other. And like I feel like as a direct result of AA, like I have gotten to like start to become the like health conscious, super spiritual, sober woman that I am today. You know, like I don't act like a complete fucking fool who's puking on myself and pissing myself in public all the time. And, you know, besides that stuff, I also have this like clarity of mind. And I wish that I could just like grant this life on all the people that struggle with this disease. You know, I was reading those journals that I had mentioned earlier, and there were so many like recaps of conversations that I had with my friend who wound up dying in 2015, and it's just so fucking heartbreaking. You know, they say like when you come into recovery, this is like an old saying, it probably um, gears more towards men or whatever, but you know, they used to say when you come into recovery, buy a suit because you're going to be going to a lot of funerals. And it's just it's so heartbreaking. You know, I've lost a lot of family to this disease. I've lost countless people that I grew up with to this disease. And, you know, now that I'm in recovery, I wind up losing a lot of people that I've met here to this disease. And I am just, I wonder sometimes like why my higher power decided to spare me for as long as he did. I always say when I share, if I got what I deserved, I'd be dead. Um, you know, if it was by drinking myself to death or overdosing or getting into a car accident or killing myself, because, you know, I'll also say that within sobriety, I've really come to terms with a lot of my mental health issues. And a few years ago, I hit a bottom in recovery. And thank God for like the ability to ask for help, which is something that AA has taught me. You know, I was always too prideful to ask for help. And I've been able to ask for help and escape some pretty, you know, harrowing feelings that, you know, may have made me pick up, but might have made me want to take my own life. And you know, today I feel closer to my higher power than ever. It gives me a purpose in life. And that's all I've ever wanted was just the ability to like help people. And if, you know, my sobriety has helped one other person stay sober just for another day, you know, I know that I fulfilled my life's purpose. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me on
Oh,
your show.
yeah, I mean, like, look at you. Like, we went for, I don't know what I'm gonna talk about. To like, look at us. We were like, what, an hour, 20-minute mark? Like, that's impressive. I'm not cutting shit. Like, you know, like, it's gonna be the length of the episode because it is what it is. And I want the world to listen to what you have to say. And yeah, thank you again. Thank you, Caity, a lot for, you know, being the guest of Stairway to Redemption and sharing your story. And guys, I will see you for the conclusion, as usual. All right. That was episode number 36, I believe, with Caity. Shout out to Caity for being the guest on this episode. Oh, by the way, this reminds me that I need to clarify that's not the same Caity. That's a different one from the episode. Different Caity from an episode, I believe, the episode on relapse, and also the Caity who helps me with reach. So there are two Caities, the one from episode 11 on relapse, I believe, and that helps me with reach, and roundtable episode, and this Caity, who this is her first time on the podcast. Hopefully she'll be back. What a great episode. Yeah, so as usual, guys, follow us on social media, show your love and support to the Patreon page, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.